be talking about today that I'm really excited about is in terms of water resources. I'm going to be talking about a ditch inventory that's been going on in the Middle Colorado region that has been taking place for over a year now. And Wendy Ryan will be talking about that. We're going to be talking a bit about Watershed, a survey that was done on watershed plans and stream management plan groups. And this survey was done amongst farmers and ranchers and what they see in these kinds of processes and the potential of that. We have Zane Kessler from the Colorado River Water Conservation District is going to be talking about some big issues on the Colorado River. So that'll be wrapping up our talk about specifically water. Then we have Retta, she's going to be here talking about rangeland management. And then at the end, I'm going to just talk a little bit about grants and loans related to water projects and what's out there and how to navigate that process. So if we are all ready, we're going to be a little bit ahead, and if we do get a bit ahead of schedule throughout today, we're going to take a break in the middle of the presentation, so I'll be keeping track on that. But otherwise, we're going to be doing our best to stay on schedule. So our first speaker, Wendy Ryan, she's with Colorado River Engineering, and she's been there since 2017, and before that, worked as the assistant state climatologist. She's been involved quite a bit with this ditch inventory that's been taking place along the Middle Colorado with the Book Cliff, Mount Sopris, and Southside Conservation Districts. So Wendy, if you looks like you are ready.
All right, I take it that you can see the screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, as Greg said, my name is Wendy Ryan. I've been working as the project manager with the Mount Sopris, Book Cliff, and Southside Conservation Districts. So the ditch inventory has really been one of our portions of the integrated watershed management planning effort that's been going on in the Middle Colorado region. So I'm just going to start with our mission statement. This was actually formulated between both the consumptive use side and the non-consumptive use side of the integrated watershed management plan through our advisory committee. And the mission reads, to improve security for all water uses in the Middle Colorado River by understanding and protecting existing uses, meeting shortages, and promoting healthy riverine ecosystems and agriculture in the face of increased future demand and climate uncertainty. So we're separately kind of working on this plan, the consumptive use side, and then the environmental rec side. But then at the end, we're going to work collaboratively to bring all of these ideas that we're formulating together. So why is it an integrated plan? It highlights the importance of all water uses in the region. Agriculture is by far the largest water user, but there's also other water uses. And the Colorado Basin Roundtable has really put an emphasis on equalizing all water uses when we're evaluating the needs and the shortages that we're seeing in our areas. The integrated plan also encourages communication and cooperation. So it provides opportunities for people from different sectors to educate one another on the issues that they're facing related to water. It lets them discuss their collective interests as well as, differences that they have on various water issues in the region. And it helps different sectors understand the risks associated, with agriculture or environmental or recreational or municipal needs in the basin. And the personal connections that we make through this collaborated plan, it helps open that dialogue between the different stakeholder groups and hopefully gives us a better final product at the end of the day. It also heightens the degree of implementation success that we can see from the plan when we're taking into account all these different users. It lets us cooperate on large-scale multi-use projects, which lets us leverage our resources a little bit better. And multi-use projects are definitely a little bit more attractive to funding partners when you're trying to get funding for different projects. So if an agricultural producer wants to do improvements to their ditch diversion structure, if they can work with an environmental group and maybe make that fish friendly, so fish can get up and spawn in the tributaries, then you open up a lot more funding opportunities to be able to complete that project. So the Integrated Watershed Management Plan coordination, as I stated, the consumptive use side is being done by the Book Cliff, Mount Sopris, and Southside Conservation Districts, and we're focusing on the consumptive use needs and risk analysis, as well as the ditch inventory, our infrastructure inventory and assessment. And then the Middle Colorado Watershed Council, under the direction of Brink, is working on the environmental and recreational use needs and risk analysis. Each different, the two different groups got their own funding, largely through the Roundtable and the Colorado Water Plan grants, and each group has their own consultant. So I'm working on the consumptive use side, and then Seth Mason from Lodic Hydrological is working on the environmental and recreational side. And then we come together, we have an advisory committee that kind of guides both portions of the planning efforts, and then we have different stakeholder groups that focus on their specific areas of interest. So Greg came to the Middle Colorado, and through Colorado Ag Water Alliance, they produced this video that I hope plays well. So I'm going to get it going here, and hopefully you can hear it.
The Middle Colorado Watershed supports many uses. The Middle Colorado Watershed supports many uses, including agriculture, municipal, environment, and recreation. To support irrigated water management in the watersheds, the Mount Sopris, Book Cliff, and Southside Conservation Districts have partnered on a ditch inventory project. This multi-partner project documents conditions of irrigation ditches within the watershed. The district's work is an example of how an assessment of irrigation infrastructure can help identify and prioritize areas where multi-benefit improvement projects are both needed and feasible.
I am the fourth generation, and I'm raising the fifth generation on Porter Ranch, south of Newcastle, Colorado. We grow hay, grain, and cattle.
I was born and raised in Rifle, Colorado, and my family's been here in this area since 1883. We have about 140 acres, and I produce hay.
I don't believe many users of the ditch understand, other than from their head gate to their field, what the rest of the ditch entails and some of the problem spots. Having the ditch inventory would be the first step in addressing some of those issues.
In order to understand the consumptive use portion of the Integrated Water Management Plan, we have to get a handle on how the water is used and who's using it. Doing the ditch inventory helps us quantify the amount of water that's being diverted for consumptive beneficial use, as well as we need to understand our rights.
We're overseeing and managing the ditch inventory that's taking place, going out and helping landowners assess their ditch conditions, and trying to find projects on the ground that we can help landowners, water users, improve their water efficiency and protect their water right. We're assessing the condition of the headgate. Can that water user get water into their headgate and efficiently move it down their ditch? Documenting culverts, all of the smaller headgates off of the ditch, the laterals, any points of failure that might exist on that ditch, if there is an area of erosion, or if there is wetlands being created from that ditch, invasive species, if we can document those and try to get landowners to recognize what those issues are.
Our Garfield Creek ditch that they inventoried, there was a spot in the mid-90s, the ditch seeped and slid, very time-consuming, lots and lots of money to fix that ditch. And maybe with some of these ditch inventories, they can see problems like that before they occur.
So once the inventory has been done, the ditch has been walked, we've documented all the different points on the ditch. We have a GIS technician that then maps all of that, plots the irrigated acreage that the state has assessed that belongs to that ditch. But we're also providing all of the background information to those water users, all of their water right decrees, the different priority dates and uses decreed on that structure.
Understanding how much water the ditches hold and what size of reservoir could be built on that ditch. I see that ditch inventory as a tool to use to hopefully build more reservoirs.
Once you know what your ditch looks like, the condition, you know about your water right, you know how to protect it, then we're giving them information on grant opportunities.
I just see it as a way to get a connection of ideas from the different producers of what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, and then make plans to implement changes.
The ideal long-term thoughts are the efficiencies that we can achieve on the land with our irrigation can be modified or adjusted so that more water can be left in the streams appropriate times.
Multi-use projects build partnerships between landowners and other water users. The major thing is you're going to find more funding opportunities.
Hopefully, we can work our way through the integrated water management plan. Maybe we can get to a place that's more ideal than it is now.
Okay, so I just wanted to show that we were really pleased with how that video came out, and we thought it really conveyed, you know, the mission that we're trying to accomplish with these infrastructure assessments. So as the video kind of briefly described, these ditch inventory assessments, we're trying to empower these water right owners by giving them information that they need, not only to know what their water rights are, but how to protect them going forward. So it all starts with a technician from the NRCS making contact with a landowner, walking that ditch. They're taking GPS points the whole way. Photos are taken along the way that are kind of geo-referenced to the location where they were taken, so we know exactly where that point on the ditch is. And then all of that comes back to our office here at Colorado River Engineering, and we produce an engineering report where we'll look at the notes that are taken by the NRCS technician and just write up, you know, a summary of not only what was done for the ditch assessment, but we're describing what their water rights are, how many priorities are decreed under that structure, and are there different uses decreed for those different priorities. Diversion records. A lot of people don't even know that their diversion records are public information. It's readily accessible through the Division of Water Resources, so we provide all of that back to them, and they can see, you know, if diversion records aren't being reported to the Division of Water Resources, you know, the abandonment list is coming out this year. So at a first glance, that's what the division is looking at. If there's no diversion records on your ditch, you're likely going to make that first cut of abandonment. And then we provide the structure evaluation that the NRCS technician has watched or walked. We provide them a GIS map of the, you know, of the points we've taken on that ditch and all the photographs that were taken. And then the NRCS packages together different pamphlets and information regarding the irrigation and conservation practices that they recommend, as well as a variety of funding opportunities that are available to meet the needs of the different users. So this is just kind of a, you know, a scatter of the different things that we produce. Here you can see the mapping that we provide, so you can see where the technician walks the ditch, all the different points that were taken on that ditch. And then the pink polygon is showing what the Division of Resources, Water Resources has tied to that structure as being irrigated by that structure. So in some cases what we're seeing is those are not correct. They'll have the wrong structure tied to the wrong lands, or they're missing a lot of lands. So when we go back to the landowner, we want them to take a look at that and make sure that that is correct. We provide them their water right decrees, you know, just the original decree on that ditch, as well as any change cases that may have occurred on that ditch, different informational guides about, the one on the right here is for the EQIP program that's given to the landowner. You can see the diversion records here. You can see this graphic provided through the Colorado Decision Support System showing the different diversions, how much was diverted each year and in each month by that structure. And then just some photos. We'll provide all the photos back to the landowner. We don't put all of the photos in the report, but they are all provided back to the landowner. And then when it's all done, you know, we'll come up with different treatments that we found might be beneficial for that water user to do. A lot of times it's, you know, sedimentation, or there's a slough on the ditch. The measuring device isn't quite set right. A lot of times it's phreatophytes, getting those invasive species or willows or other types of vegetation out of the structure so you can more efficiently move that water down your ditch. So if you were to have an engineering firm and a lawyer kind of package all this together for you, it would probably cost you somewhere around $5,000. But through these funding grants that we've gotten, this is the service that we're providing back to the water users in our area. So from these different ditch assessments, as well as through the integrated watershed management planning process, We've come up with a variety of different projects. This obviously won't be an exhaustive list. That'll get finished as we finish our planning efforts, but just some of them that boil to the top, diversion structure upgrades. You can see that this structure here spans the length of the creek, and it acts as a fish barrier. You can see it's also kind of clogging up with material from the creek. So the benefits of upgrading these types of structures are that you can get more precise measurements. If you can add an automated headgate to that structure, then you're easing the operations for the landowner to move that water into their ditch. We can do different kind of improvements for fish passage, whether it's just a fish screen, or if it's a bypass channel, or a fish ladder. There's all different kinds of designs that you can do for different structures to make that structure a little bit more fish friendly. It minimizes entrainment of not only fish, but also sediment, and can improve water quality when you do those diversion structure upgrades. Ditch lining projects, lots of benefits from ditch lining, also unintended consequences of ditch lining, but some of the benefits include improved efficiency. What that means is you're more efficiently getting that water to your ditch, and the efficiency is the ratio of the water that you're diverting that actually makes it to the plant. So you get higher delivery yields with a more efficient conveyance structure. And as well, with less sediment loading and stuff like that through your ditch, less erosion, you're also improving the water quality. Riparian restoration, lots of benefits to riparian restoration. Removal of noxious weeds, you know, along the Middle Colorado, the main river corridor, there's a lot of tamarisk and Russian olive that should and will likely be removed in the future. But removing those invasive species that outcompete our native species increases the biodiversity and increases the habitat function for our riverine ecosystems. And it also increases the forage for, you know, cattle and other wildlife. And small-scale storage, we've talked a lot about this. You know, it's really hard to build a big storage project these days, and it's interesting in our part of the river. On the north side of the river, our water users benefit from Rifle Gap and Harvey Gap under the Silt project. So they've got, you know, a more reliable water supply throughout the summer. On the south side of the river, those tributaries are beholden to their physical water supply that they get from snowmelt. And those water users have to take it during runoff because it's the only opportunity that they're going to get. So on the south side, producers will maybe get 1 cutting of hay a year. On the north side, they're getting 3 cuttings of hay. So there's much more incentive on the north side for those producers to implement efficiency structures like center pivots or side row sprinklers and stuff like that. Whereas for 1 cutting of hay, when you only get a few weeks of water a year, you can't really incentivize that. So we've been looking a lot at different small-scale storage projects that we can benefit from. And the different benefits include supplemental irrigation water, supplemental late-season environmental base flow, so making those releases during the critical time of the year to benefit the aquatic ecosystems. And then it also can serve as an augmentation supply for junior water users. So if you have a well and you need an augmentation supply to be able to use that when there's a call, these small-scale projects can also meet that need. And so the different opportunities that will come of this will be reach-scale pilot projects, whether they are on public or private land, and just a listing of a few of them here: the riparian habitat restoration, the diversion structure upgrades for fish passage. And I should also note that talking with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Trout Unlimited, in some cases they don't want fish to be able to pass. If they've got a native population of cutthroat trout, they actually want to keep that isolated into the headwaters of some of these tributaries. So in some cases, you know, a diversion structure or a reservoir or something creating a blockage is actually a benefit to those populations. So different ditch lining opportunities, gravel pit reclamation. There's a lot of gravel pits in this part of our section of the watershed that could benefit from being reclaimed, getting rid of those evaporative surfaces. Recreational access has been a focus of the environmental and recreation side of the Integrated Watershed Management Plan, getting people access to the river in more locations downstream from Glenwood Springs. Conservation easements and other incentives to keep that water on the land. We've done a variety of outreach and education events. We've had the River District come and talk about the big river issues and different, the Division of Water Resources talking about water administration in the basin. So trying to get out there and just educate our users about the different concepts in our basin. And then some of these might actually spin into like a research or an evaluation project. How much do we benefit from doing riparian restoration? Do we see an increase in biodiversity and that kind of stuff? So with that, that's about all I've got unless there's any questions.
Right, well, I apologize in the background. There's actually construction going on, so you might hear some interesting sounds here. So, but Wendy, I was wondering how many fishes are involved in this inventory? How many more do you have left?
We've probably done about 35 or 40 structures, and it's an ever-evolving list as we get people who kind of say no to us. We've got a lot of pushback from, oil and gas companies that own the lands and don't really want us walking their ditch, just to landowners that are a little bit suspicious of someone coming on their property and walking their structures. So we've got about 100 on the list, so we're about halfway through them.
In these inventories, how often are you running into problems of like sedimentation and erosion?
A lot, especially on the south side of the river. Those creeks run pretty muddy. So there's been we've seen a lot of interesting techniques that people are using to try to, kind of screen out some of that water. So it's been pretty interesting to see. On the north side of the river, those watersheds are they run a little cleaner, like Canyon Creek and Elk Creek. So we don't see them up there as much as we do south of the river.
Yeah. So are there certain kinds of projects that you see coming out from this that can really help with that sediment and erosion problem?
Yeah, largely we're looking at, lining of ditches, stuff like that, to decrease that sediment load. I know that some people are looking at sedimentation ponds to try to settle that water, especially if they're want to put in a sprinkler system. You can't really efficiently run a sprinkler system if your water is full of sediment. So, yeah.
Well, my last question is about the storage and what kind of opportunities do you see for that? I know on a similar process that's been done on the Uncompahgre, and they're finding, I think they're going to be calling Ram's Head or Ram's Horn Reservoir, because they're in April they have so many flows coming down that river and no one's diverting it. They don't need it at the time, but by storing that water, those April flows, not only do they have a late season source of irrigation, but they have these flows that can help habitat later in the season too. So what kind of storage options do you see, if any, coming from this process?
There's been a few. The one that rises to the top is Kendig Reservoir. It's a conditional water right held by West Divide Water Conservancy District and the Colorado River District. That one is about a 15,000 acre foot reservoir on West Divide Creek. And, West Divide has been studying this for a lot of years, and there is some interest. There's some pushback on it. But we continue to do feasibility studies to see if we can build that. So right now the funding just isn't in place to be able to build, a reservoir that comes out roughly at about $5,000 an acre foot. But we've also kind of looked at the dam safety records to see if there are existing structures that could, maybe have a restriction on storage because they need some kind of repair or something like that, to look at those existing structures to see if we could bring them back online, if they can be rehabilitated. And there's also been talk of, just doing kind of small beaver pond-like storage within the channel to just slow down the timing of that runoff. Probably not as effective as, a large reservoir would be at that, but what we run into in this section of the river, because we already have storage on the north side, and, tributaries like Elk Creek and Canyon Creek, they run pretty good. But on the south side, it's more of a water right problem. West Divide operates another small reservoir that 3 out of the past 5 years, it's 181 acre feet, and we couldn't fill it because the call has come on so early and the priority of that reservoir is so low that we end up just having to bypass all those flows. So there's, quite a few issues that you have to take into account. You can build a reservoir, but if you can get water into it, you're even better off.
Oh, no, that's a very good point, Wendy. Have any other questions, whether you can type that in or please feel free, and you can leave Wendy off the hook. All right. Well, Wendy, I thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And this is a really exciting project that you're involved with. I know I'm appreciative of the work you're doing, and we are too. So thank you.
All right, thank you. We appreciate all the work you're helping us with, so thank you as well.
All right. So our next speaker we'll get to right here, Phil Brink. Phil Brink, he's the consulting coordinator for Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Water Network. The mission of the Ag Water Network is to keep ag water connected with ag land. The Ag Water Network provides information, training, technical resources on water-related topics that affect Colorado ag producers. And Phil Brink, he's also an environmental scientist and has previously worked as a hydrologist and water quality analyst. And so Phil, he's going to be talking about some survey findings that they did with the Ag Water Network. Phil, are you all ready to go?
I think so. Can you see my screen, Greg?
Yep, we are figuring out this technology stuff.
It's amazing. When it works, and it works well, it's a wonderful thing. So do you want me to get rolling?
Yep, go on ahead.
All right, thanks, Greg. All right, well, it's great to be with everybody today. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. So as Greg mentioned, CCA created the Ag Water Network out of concern over the increasing loss of irrigated ag land in Colorado. So our mission is all about helping to keep ag water connected with ag land. And that's really, this year and last year, we've been focusing on watershed and stream management planning because we see that as a really big piece of that. It's a growing area of interest. It's a growing area of funding from the standpoint of what the state has been directing funding toward. And so we see some opportunities in the ag community, just as Wendy kind of pointed out, for us to achieve some much needed infrastructure improvement, different types of benefits that can accrue to us and at the same time help other water users as well. So I'm going to be talking with you about the survey results from a survey we conducted last year among ag producers around the state. And this was specifically on watershed and stream management planning. And some of you may have taken that survey, and we appreciate that if you did. And we're not going to go through all 15 of the questions. We're just going to go through a few of them. But before we dive into this, I thought it would be a good kind of a refresher to start out with a question. And that question is, what do watershed and stream management planning and agriculture really have in common? And the answer to that really is that watershed and stream management planning and agriculture are both inextricably tied to water and land. And really, we can't do much in agriculture without water and land. And watershed and stream management planning is really all about protecting and enhancing land and water resources, as well as the uses that depend on those resources. So in ag, we are the largest water user in the state. We're also the largest controller of land in the state. So when there's discussions around watersheds or stream or integrated water management planning, we really need to be at the table. John Stolp, our former ag commissioner, used to say that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we make a pretty big meal in agriculture, so we want to avoid that. Okay, our focus this year in the Ag Water Network is, as I mentioned, watershed and stream management planning, and really a two-phase outreach in the form of presentations like today's and other publications and articles, webinars on topics related to watershed and stream management planning and agriculture, and then collaboration with organizations like Greg's group, the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, with individual CCA affiliates, other ag-oriented groups, the Colorado State Conservation Board, and individual conservation districts. This year, we're also doing a workshop training, or we'd like to get back into that when the COVID crisis kind of settles down. what the workshop training is really about. We did 2 of these last year, and they went very well, and they are directed towards ag-oriented folks. So producers, as well as folks that work with producers and that want to engage locally on watershed or stream or integrated water management planning efforts, and that want to be a voice for agriculture, whether they're just a volunteer or they're on a committee or co-leading or leading the local effort. We want them to be sitting at the table and being as confident as the other folks, which represent the other uses, municipal, industrial, recreational, environmental. And so that's what our training is all about. It's really designed, and it's something that Greg and I do, kind of tag team, to address the major issues that go into watershed and stream management planning. It's not exhaustive by any means, but we do try to have folks walk out the door with a solid understanding of the basics of the things that go into this. So why are we having this discussion right now? Why do we seem to be endlessly talking about water these days? These charts really give us some insight into the reason for that. We're currently at about 5.8 million in our state, and we are heading, according to the State Demographer's Office, to 8.1 million by the year 2050. That's the latest Demographer's Office projection. And that has, by the way, gone down substantially since when I first started giving these presentations 4.5 years ago. It was well over 9 million. Now, if we look over to the right here on the top right, that's Colorado River flow. And that is just a chart showing the flow over a long period of time. I know Zane's going to get more into this and specifics about flow and things, but this is really since the early 1900s. And you can see that the trend has been steadily kind of downward, even though it's highly variable. And then below that, and we look at the average temperature in the Upper Colorado River Basin, and the trend is just the opposite. This goes clear back to the late 1800s, and this one is obviously showing a significant uptrend. And in fact, if you look at from 2000 forward, you see almost a boosting of that. It seems like it's might be even accelerating a little bit. So none of these trends are necessarily our friends per se, but we still have to be proactive in how we respond to these new realities so that we can maintain a viable ag industry, both in the Western Slope and around the state. And so watershed and stream management planning is really, I think, part and parcel to us being able to do that. The water plan has a goal when it comes to watershed and stream management plans that the plans address the needs of a diverse set of local stakeholders. And then underneath that overarching goal, there are 2 measurable objectives: that by 2030, 80% of our locally prioritized rivers will have stream management plans, and that 80% of our critical watersheds will have watershed management plans. So I think we're well on our way towards that. We have a lot of work to do, but I think we'll probably achieve those goals. A lot of people are still very unclear as to what these things called watershed or stream management plans or integrated water management plans are. You may hear them called other things as well, community water plans or healthy river initiatives. And I thought, just to try to keep things as simple as we could, I would break them down into just watershed or stream management plans. Over here on the upper right, you see the Upper Colorado River Basin watershed, and here we have the main stem of the Colorado, the headwaters and the headwaters plateau as it's known, and then we have some of the major watersheds that feed into it. And so a watershed plan is often going to be something on the scale of a roaring fork or an eagle. But when they develop those plans, or when those plans are fleshed out, then they'll go up to the major tributaries and look at the individual needs, because oftentimes we see that these smaller subbasins have very different needs in some cases, just even within the same watershed. So ultimately, it really has to be very local in terms of how these watershed plans are structured. And then those local needs can be brought into the more broad regional needs of the watershed. And then that makes the administrative process much more efficient, makes it much easier to go after funding, large pots of funding, and provide, get that cost share money and things and match funds. Down on the stream management plan side, it's really more of a smaller scale stream segment or segments or reaches within a watershed. So this example is of the Yampa through Steamboat, and they had concerns about flows through the river, particularly during the summertime. When the flows get low, the dissolved oxygen level drops because of the temperature increases. And then they also have a very robust recreational component here in the Yampa through Steamboat. And if you've ever been there in the summer, you can see a regular flotilla going down the river on any given day. And so between the fisheries and the recreation, they had a real concern about the river and maintaining flow. So they developed this plan for that. And that's typical of kind of the scale you would see with the stream management plan. Now, what are some basics? If you really distill what these plans are about, it's really evaluating and prioritizing local water-related problems. So Wendy talked about what they're doing on the Middle Colorado, and that's really all about identifying, first of all, and inventorying what those problems are and where those problem areas are. And then when that information becomes available and you've kind of filled the gaps in that information that you need, then that's where we move into securing and administering project funding. And then once that is done, then we get into the real fun part of this, which is implementing the improvements. And those improvements then are designed to support all the existing uses as well as the healthy rivers and streams. I'm just going to stop here and ask a question. Can you guys see? I've got a screen that just popped up over here on my right side. Can you see that?
I can't see anything.
Okay, great. And one of the I guess three aspects about the plans is really good to know is that they are locally driven and they are non-regulatory. So nobody is foisting these plans upon us and requiring us to do them. It all has to be from grassroots support and interest locally in trying to solve local community-based problems. And so it has to be consensus-based. So you have to have all water stakeholders at the table. Okay, so diving into our survey now, and we're not going to go through all the 15 questions that we asked, but just some basic facts about the survey. We had over 330 total responses, and of those, we were able to use 288 responses. And we had responses from producers in 56 of our 64 counties, so about 88% of the producers were represented by at least one producer in the counties, and sometimes quite a number of them. Garfield County, by the way, was very well represented. Eagle County had some, Mesa County, Pitkin County. And so those are the ones that I'm going to focus on rather than the whole state. I pulled out the responses that we got from those 4 counties based on what Ginny had told me was kind of the primary audience here, though I know it's open statewide. And so we're just going to look at a few of the responses that we got from questions, and it's from that group of those counties. So one question we asked is, what water-related challenges would you most like to improve upon? And this, again, kind of goes back to what Wendy was talking about, the amount of water, delivery infrastructure, irrigation efficiency, and storage. Those were the big ones. And interestingly enough, water rights issues among these 41 folks in these counties came in at 38%. And that's about the highest I've seen. If we look at it statewide, it's much lower than that. It's around 20%. When you get out in the plains, there's less ambiguity on water rights, and there's less concern about that. But you can see that that's a big issue. And then water quality, about 20%. So some folks have really good quality water, and other folks are fighting a lot of sediment and maybe some other problems as well. What should be the priorities of your local stream or watershed management plan? 76% of these respondents said that preserving and enhancing existing uses should be a priority. And again, I'm going to refer back to the Middle Colorado and what their mission statement was. And that was all about protecting those uses and securing the future, really. And so, and then creating a drought contingency plan. You can see about half the folks thought that would be an appropriate priority, as well as irrigation infrastructure improvement and adding more storage. No big surprises there. Channel improvement, riparian area restoration, and forest health and fire mitigation. I think those right now are showing up low. I think those are probably both going to increase as we have more knowledge on how those can be beneficial in terms of the mitigation and improving those situations to ag producers and to our source water, and improving water quality. So another question we asked was, if you were to participate in a watershed or a stream management planning meeting, which of the following would be most helpful for you? And we had 78% over here saying that having a better understanding of watershed management plans would be helpful. Now, the interesting thing about this is statewide, we had about 51%, just slightly more than half of all the folks that took this survey had already been involved in watershed or stream management planning activities locally or were currently. And yet we had about 70% statewide that said they would like to have a better understanding. Here in these 4 counties of these respondents that we got, it was 78%, so even higher. So it tells us that we need to do a lot more in the form of outreach and education on what these plans are and what benefits can accrue to agriculture through being involved in their development. Not holding meetings during harvest irrigation season, busy times of the year, that's no big surprise to any ag producer. And then attending meetings via conference call. And this is something that previously, prior to COVID, I guess one good thing that's come out of COVID is that we've all become a lot more tech savvy, and we're probably all going to be a lot more comfortable having conference calls going forward. Who is well suited to lead watershed or stream management planning activities in your area? And we had 71% saying their local conservation districts. So a big shout out to you guys in the South Side, Mount Sopris and Book Cliff conservation districts. There's a lot of support as well as other conservation districts. And by the way, this was high statewide. It was about 60%. So a little bit higher in these counties, but still it was the majority and it was the #1. And then a coalition of other water interests that represent kind of all the local stakeholders, water conservancy and conservation districts, ag organizations like CCA affiliates or others, and then county. And since we talked about the conservation districts and the level of support that they really have and the level of interest that folks have in having them serve as leaders in this capacity if they want to, I thought I'd just put in a pitch here for conservation districts, a little bit of information about them. There's 76 of them spread around the state. And they've been around for decades, as probably most people that are listening to this are aware. And you probably interacted with your conservation district maybe on multiple occasions and been involved in projects where they help provide funding or technical expertise. But they have an established organizational structure. They can receive and administer grants. They have local landowner boards. And in fact, it's a statutory requirement that they have at least 66% or 2/3 of their board made up of ag producers and landowners. And they're already focused on soil and water resources. So it's really perfect. I mean, it's a perfect kind of fit with watershed and stream management plans. And they're organized around watersheds. So out of these 76 conservation districts around the state, they actually fit within 10 watershed associations. So they're really perfectly positioned to lead or co-lead if their local leadership, their boards want to serve in that role or want to take that role on. And this is something that we can, outside of the conservation district, whether you're a member of it or you're a member of like a CCA affiliate or Farm Bureau or some other organization, we can come alongside and work closely with conservation districts to help them. And by doing so, then the idea is that we can have a larger voice, more consolidated voice in ag and help to shape these plans and the goals and ultimately where some of the funding goes. So the last question I'm going to show you is, we asked this question, please rate your interest in participating in a local watershed management planning initiative. And look at the level of interest. And these are from some of the busiest folks in the world, ag producers. And yet we see that if we add up the 3s, 4s, and 5s, we've got 91% of the respondents to this survey saying that they are interested. And it's a pretty robust response. It surprised me, quite frankly. And it really, to me, goes to the fact that ag producers are very interested in things and planning initiatives that are going to involve the resources from which they derive their livelihood. And so this is something that we know ag producers from across the state are very interested in. Statewide, it was about 88%. So this is pretty ubiquitous in terms of this level of interest. The challenge then becomes engaging ag producers in ways which are more convenient for them to get them at the table and to get their voices heard. So just a summary of some of the producer comments we got. More information is needed on watershed and stream management plans. I think we saw that very clearly in one of those graphs. And then we need to make it easy to find out what's going on. And that's been kind of hard in the past, but it's a much easier now really with websites and with social media. Anytime there's something going on, even just the minutes of a meeting, good to push those out so people can look online at their leisure when they have time and see so that they can feel like they're keeping up. On the meetings, keep those meetings short with well-defined objectives and a positive atmosphere. And then avoid meetings during hunting, calving, irrigation, and harvest season so that The busy times of the year, somebody pointed out, well, that leaves us about 2 weeks. But again, I think that goes back to being able to conference into calls and try to kill two birds with one stone. Ag water rights, interesting thing here. We didn't ask any questions about ag water rights, and yet the subject still came up in the comments that we got back. So there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of insecurity about ag water rights and about ag viability protection in general. But just the security of water rights, when we know we've kind of got a big target on our back in agriculture. So addressing those, and then working on leasing ag water for other uses. We know from the 2016 survey that we did on this subject of alternative transfer mechanism or ag water leasing, where we're leasing water to other uses in a way that is temporary, voluntary, and compensated. We know that there's a lot of interest among ag water right holders to engage in these. What we don't have is a lot of interest over on the municipal side or the industrial or some of the other uses, and that's what we'd like to work on and see improve. And then on the implementation side, I heard this multiple voices kind of saying this in their comments, that we need to reach the implementation phase sooner. There's a lot of planning, and that planning is essential. However, I think that we could, when we start this planning process, if we could identify maybe some small projects that didn't require a lot of technical assistance or a lot of money to get done, we could get those installed quickly and then have something that we could take people out and show them so that they could actually see what this looks like on the ground. And that helps to maintain that momentum and that interest among the stakeholders. Okay, just some example projects, and I know Greg's going to talk more about funding and things, and he'll go through probably some of the funding the projects as well. But just the assessment of irrigation delivery infrastructure, like Wendy talked about, and she talked about all the benefits, and I thought that was fabulous. I mean, it's incredible, and if I was over there, I'd say sign me up. Upgrading diversion structures. You know, imagine having a diversion structure that instead of bringing trash and sediment and debris into your ditch, it actually diverts it away from your ditch, and at the same time incorporates kind of a low flow corridor so fish can move freely up and down the stream. And storage studies, that was also mentioned, and then a river flow analysis. And we're talking about systems that are based on, flow, and flow is of interest to all of us. Then we really need to have a handle on that. And the way to do that is to have a hydrologic analysis done, so then we can start identifying the problems and where we can instigate fixes for those problems. Some more examples, just channel improvement and bank stabilization. This is a problem throughout the state of erosion of embankments and just channels that have been modified many times over the years, and that's changed the whole functioning of the river. And so when we start working to stabilize those embankments, it really helps to reduce the sediment in the stream or the river. Every time those banks, whether it's on a creek or a river or a ditch, every time they slough off, it's dumping tons of sediment into that water body, and ultimately that's going to wind up in either a diversion structure and a canal or a drinking water supply where they're going to have to filter it out, or all of the above. So we really benefit kind of everybody by engaging in these activities that improve the functioning of the river as well as the stability of the embankment and the riparian areas. And then forest health and fire mitigation. I will tell you that we recently finished a video. I don't have time to show it today, but we're going to do a webinar on it here in about a month or a little more than a month on fire mitigation, forest health, how it relates back to ag and other water uses. But we have about 24.4 million acres of forested land in our state. And of those, about a quarter of those acres are impacted by beetle kill or some type of pest that has set us up really well, unfortunately, for catastrophic fire. And then when you combine that with, we've got now about 50% of our population that live in what's called the wildland urban corridor, it really sets us up for some major challenges and budgetary challenges going forth relative to fire. And in the past, what's happened is that most of the budget has been spent fighting fire rather than mitigating it. So one of the things that we can really emphasize in these watershed plans and the basin plans, which I'll talk about in a moment, is the importance of looking at proactive forest health management and fire mitigation for source water protection for everybody, not just ag, but municipals, for recreation, environmental, all of the above. Now, looking down the road here for 2020, this is the year of the updates of the basin implementation plans, and that includes the Upper Colorado River as well as all the other basins. And what these plans are really focused on this year is identifying those key concerns, what has changed since the last plans were developed, and what goals are present in the basin that need to be addressed. And then within that, then you start looking at what data do we need to fill gaps, what modeling is needed for that purpose, and then through that, identifying those priority projects and processes. And that's going to go back into driving those goals and then setting that funding and where those funding buckets and how they need to be allocated. So very important that we in agriculture engage in these processes within our basin to make sure our voice is heard and that we get those priority projects for ag included so that that's going to get funding down the road. These BIP updates, by the way, are going to be completed September 2021, so a little more than a year from now. So there should be plenty of time for us to provide input on that. But again, that process is kind of starting up, and we're going to hear more about that in the coming months on opportunities for us to engage. So it's really important that we in ag do that. As far as the Ag Water Network goes, how we can assist, if you have interest in watershed or stream management planning, we can provide presentations, both live and virtual, as well as small meetings, which are really effective, I think, in some cases where we meet with just individual boards of conservation districts or other ag affiliated organizations, just to kind of get things started and to explain the process of how these watershed or stream management plans work. And then we can do workshops and mini workshops, as I talked a little bit about the workshops before, and we can break those into smaller ones that we do over a period of time. And those are, by the way, tailored to local interests. And then the other thing is that we can help on securing funding for planning and projects. So those are some of the things, and we obviously are aligned towards agriculture. Our objective is to help keep ag water connected with ag land. And so we very much want to help in that capacity. So with that, I am going to wrap it up. And I guess if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer those right now.
Wendy just made a comment. I have a question for you, and I'm also going to redirect it back to Wendy. So we have this IPP process, these BIPs, all these, you're mentioning all these acronyms and these plans and getting projects in the queue. How important is that, do you think? Phil, I'll ask you first, and Wendy, identifying projects now.
So I guess I would say it's, it's important that we have the data, obviously, to back up why we need the project and what benefit the project is going to provide. Multi-benefit projects where it's not just agriculture, but it can benefit other water users it's going to score higher and get a much, probably a warmer reception in terms of securing funding. But the question of how important is it to get going with that, I think it's really important, especially now where we're looking at budget reductions for the next few years. Now I guess I'll just turn it over to Wendy from there.
Wendy, you there? She might have left, but we'll see if she comes back. In the comment, she wrote that, so she is working on the basin implementation plan update for the middle Colorado River. And if they have any suggestions of projects, you can email her at wendy@coloradorivereng.com. Oh, Wendy, are you back with us now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the main things about getting those identified projects on the list is that, like Phil said, when you go to get maybe a water plan grant or a basin roundtable grant, they want to know if your project that you're seeking funding for is on that IPMP list. So it not only dictates the priorities of our basin, but that also trickles up into the Colorado Water Plan. So.
Yeah, and maybe Wendy, you can help me out on this. I know that in the South Platte, the Metro Basin, the Rio Grande, I mean, all those projects that they identified in the last go around, they've gone through every one of those. And so all of those have been funded and done with. Do you know, in term on the Colorado Basin, how far have they gone through that list?
You know, I'm not working on the whole basin level. I'm really just working on the projects that have been identified in kind of the middle river section where we're working on the integrated watershed management plan. So I can tell you a lot of what remains on this list are conditional water rights held by West Divide Water Conservancy District that would maybe secure better water supplies on the south side of the river. There's also a lot of silt project priorities remain on this list. Securing the Shoshone outage protocol and, you know, securing that Shoshone water right are still on the list. There's a couple other reservoirs on the list. Low flow salinity issues in the basin. So there's a lot still on the list in our section of the river that haven't yet been developed.
And Phil, I've got one last question for you. In terms of what the work that you've been doing and the outreach and helping getting producers to just try to drum up producer involvement and even leading some of these projects. I know COVID has thrown a big curveball your way, but where are other parts of the state where you're seeing a lot of involvement and a lot of work on your part?
So we are seeing, you know, still interest continues. I mean, obviously the issues related to our needs around water have not gone away, even though COVID has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into a lot of our lives. But we're seeing on the Upper Arkansas, for example, they are starting a process on watershed. You know, it'll be more of an integrated water management planning process down the Purgatory Spanish Peaks area. The conservation districts down there are also starting on a process. We've seen a little bit going on out in the plains, and of course the White River. That's White River and the Douglas Creek conservation districts led by Callie Hendrickson. They are embarking on a plan, and they've really been very systematic as they walk through this and gathered a tremendous amount of community and stakeholder input. And so they're I think being very wise about how they approach this and not trying to do it too fast, but making sure that they hear multiple times from the stakeholders in the community, those who are using the rivers, not just ag users, but all of the users. And so they're working towards, like right now, they're trying to figure out their mission statements and the primary goals. And they will, you know, they'll release that, develop after the draft for everyone to take a look at and comment on. And so I think there are, you know, plans and watershed management planning initiatives that are continuing around the state. I also didn't mention the Mancos, but that's another one. So there are things that continue to go on despite the fact that we're kind of set back here for a while by COVID. But I think, you know, we're gonna continue, and things will really probably start roaring back here later part of this year and into next.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Phil. I really appreciate that. And we're a bit ahead of schedule. So I think we're going to go with the plan, and we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. I know, Zane, you're next. And is that all right with you? I take all silence as a yes. So
sorry about that, Greg. Yeah, let's take a quick break, and I'll lead us off when we get back.
All right, perfect. So we'll be back at 2:10, and so right on schedule. And thank you for joining us.
All right.
Your Colorado River District has been working to safeguard West Slope water and keep our water on the western slope.
We were formed 82 years ago to give voice and protection to the needs of the river and the people and the communities that depend on it.
Water is absolutely vital to this area. Without the water, the land has very little value. And without irrigation, we would grow nothing but sagebrush here. My great-grandfather came from eastern Colorado, and they came here with the opening of the Grand Valley Project, the Highline Canal, and continued farming here with my grandpa, and then my dad, and now myself and my son.
Whether you're a rancher in Moffett County or a boater in Summit County, you depend upon the Colorado River. And getting people to recognize their common interests And the leverage we have when we speak with one voice is what the Colorado River District does.
It brings together the communities, the different values, and helps us to find one voice. The large municipalities want more and more water. The River District provides the engineering, the legal protection, and the advice to bring us all together.
The River District has managed over the years to fight the Front Range and the Trans Mountain diverters. We're able to bring a voice to the table and present that united front that is so important to keeping water in our rivers flowing westward.
It's important to keep water on the West Slope primarily, and what I do is for our livelihood and our farms. It's also hugely important to the municipalities and the people who live here. It's the same water that we irrigate with. It's also used for our recreational water systems. To keep a flowing river is important to all of us in this community. The pioneers who saw the potential in this valley also saw what they could do to develop the water and created a place where we could grow food, and we could grow cattle, and we could grow sheep. Without the water, this town here would be nothing more than Thompson, Utah, or a stop on the railroad.
We're protecting water supplies for the farmers and ranchers that put food on our tables. Because when farmers and ranchers thrive, the whole community thrives. This is your water. These are your rivers. And this is your Colorado River District.
All right. All right. Can everybody hear me now?
Yep, you're coming in.
Great. Thanks, folks. Want to take a minute and just give a quick overview of the River District. I know a lot of you know us well, and we enjoy the partnerships that we have with all of you. But the River District was formed in 1937 to serve as the principal water policy and planning agency for the 15 Colorado counties that form the headwaters of the Yampa, the White, the Gunnison, and the main stem of the Colorado. We also have small portions of the Dolores and the Green River within our jurisdiction. Total area of the district is about 29,000 square miles, roughly 1/3 of the state's total landmass. We were founded, importantly, in direct response to the development of the Colorado Big Thompson project, which was then and still is today the largest trans-mountain diversion in the state, diverting somewhere near 220,000 acre feet of water annually from the Colorado River Basin across the divide to the thirsty Front Range. Our predecessors on the West Slope recognized the need for the West Slope to speak with one voice when advocating for the protection of our water resources. Whether they were farmers and ranchers or anglers and conservationists, even at that time, or industries and municipalities, those counties and their constituents realized a fact that holds true to this day, that without water, none of our communities on the West Slope or our economies would continue to thrive. With that in mind, I think our charge at the River District has always been to look to the future and to take actions to protect our water resources 10, 20, and even 50 years from now. Zooming out a bit, you see the entire Colorado River Basin, and it's important for me here you can see the Colorado River District and the Southwestern Conservation District delineated in a lighter blue. 60% of the Colorado River's natural flow at Lee Ferry originates within the Colorado River District boundary. When you include the Southwestern Conservation District, it's closer to 75% of the total natural flow of the river at Lee Ferry originates on Colorado's western slope. You can also see here the areas shaded in gray outside of the native basin, large municipal use areas as well as agricultural areas that rely on diversions out of the basin. That includes the Los Angeles metro area, Imperial and Coachella valleys in the lower basin, and of course the growing Front Range here in Colorado. Next slide. diving into a few of the key challenges that I was asked to speak about. The first challenge that we see affecting our water users in the West Slope in general over the coming years is population growth. The rapid urbanization of Colorado's Front Range and the booming growth in Arizona, Southern California, and Nevada bring a number of increasing pressures, if you will, on the Colorado River system as a whole. Population growth throughout the basin is expected to increase nearly double by the year 2060, from about 40 million people today to about 70 million people by 2060. And of course, we've all seen the numbers that originated in the Swazi study and are now included in the Water Plan Technical Update that indicate a potential increase from 5.75 million people here in the state to nearly 9 million or more people by 2050. This is an interesting picture of some cotton fields in the lower basin in Arizona that I think is emblematic. And I don't mean to pick on Arizona or cotton growers by any means, but lower basin overuse is one of the major problems that we have seen with regards to increasing stress on the Colorado River system as a whole. Simply put, and I'll be blunt here, I think I and the folks that I work with at the district believe that the lower basin has an addiction to overuse of the waters of the Colorado River. Arizona, California, and Nevada have historically used somewhere between 1.1 and 1.3 million acre feet more than they were entitled to under the Colorado River Compact. This overuse, coupled with hotter temperatures and prolonged drought, which we'll discuss in a moment, have quite simply wrought havoc on the system and have caused reservoir levels at Powell and Meade to drop to alarming levels. We understand that within their own drought contingency plan, the lower basin is taking some steps to reduce use, but we should commend them on actually signing a document that does require them to use less, but the devil's in the details. I'll say that much. As I mentioned earlier, the prolonged drought we're seeing in the American Southwest is also increasing stress and presenting a significant challenge for the river. It's well documented that the West Slope particularly is in the epicenter of a region that continues to experience a significant above average rise in temperatures. This is data that showed temperature rise from 1895 to present over more than 110 years of 1895 to 2018, well over a century's worth of temperature data. And you can see that here in the upper basin, and particularly Colorado's western slope, we're seeing a significantly higher rise in temperatures. Counties from Ouray to Mesa and Moffett have experienced specifically a more than 4-degree Fahrenheit rise in average annual temperature since 1895. That's a problem for us as water managers and looking to the future, because this rise in temperature reduces water supply, it increases water consumption, and it dries out the soils, which we all know from the last few dry years, in turn reduces overall snowpack and runoff in those subsequent years. So those are a few of the top line challenges that we're looking at and trying to analyze how, oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. I think this is an important piece of data that's been studied recently, including some studies here on the Roaring Fork, as well as on the main stem of the Colorado. They're finding that for every 1 degree of temperature rise, stream flow is reduced by 3 to 5%. If you look at that 4% rise in Moffett or Mesa County, for example, you're looking at potentially a 15 to 18% reduction in stream flow. If those temperatures continue to rise as they're predicted to, that presents a significant challenge for water managers. And it's one of the things we're looking at closely to try and figure out how do we ensure that all of our constituents, whether they be ag or municipal and industrial or environmental needs for the 15-mile stretch, 15-mile reach, how are we going to deal with this in 10 years time if we continue to progress at the rate we're going? So I know every time I talk to the Holy Cross Cattlemen, I feel like I'm the bearer of bad news. And one thing I'll say is that we know that these challenges on the Colorado River and the system as a whole could bring significant challenges to our communities and our local economies. And while change can be threatening, it's also something that brings opportunity. And we believe at the district, as we always have, that the best way to confront threats and create beneficial change is to do it together as a unified West Slope. As I said earlier, the founders of the district knew that Western Colorado is best preserved when we're speaking with one voice. So a few of the things that we're doing, and we try to incorporate into everything we do, some of the pillars of the work we do, if you will. I guess I and my fellow staff members of the district are working to remain active in all corners of the district. Protecting agricultural water uses is one of the key areas of many of these pillars, whether it be my advocacy role at the state capitol or the legal team's role fighting Trans Mountain diversions, or our engineering teams work to ensure that farmers and ranchers have adequate water supplies. We also obviously work to provide environmental river flows for our reservoir, or from our reservoirs during those hot, dry periods of the year. 2018 was a perfect example where we were able to utilize, in partnership with many of the municipalities on the West Slope and other water users, including energy companies that had had water in Rudai Reservoir. We were able to strategically team up and release those waters to keep the temperatures cool and the water levels just a bit higher in the Roaring Fork River to protect some of those gold medal trout waters. In turn, those waters also went downstream to the historic users in the Grand Valley and allowed them to extend their growing season down there. So a lot of our work and a lot of these kind of four pillars here are specific to, require collaboration, and specifically they involve multiple players. And I think the River District, importantly, just plays a catalyst role in bringing those players together to achieve some common goals. I do want to speak, just because I am primarily the largest part of my portfolio is the government relations work, and I spend a lot of my time with others from the West Slope, including some on this call, down at the state capitol, advocating for West Slope water users. One thing that I think this group would be particularly interested in is the River District's priority legislation for 2020, which was signed into law by Governor Polis on, I believe, the 1st of April. That was House Bill 1159. That bill clarified the statutes and protects pre-existing water uses, historic stock watering rights and uses for West Slope ranchers was the primary example, from being called out by junior in-stream flow calls. Our efforts on this legislation benefited greatly from the work that was done in concert with Colorado Cattlemen's Association, Southwestern Water Conservation District, and affected water users in the Yampa Basin. And we all engaged in early conversations with the state, providing an opportunity to head off any potential controversy from, say, the environmental community or others. And we were able to present a unified or a well-baked idea to legislators early on in the process. As a result, House Bill 1159, with support from Representatives Dylan Roberts and Mark Catlin, both West Slope representatives, House Bill 1159 passed the House unanimously, 63 to nothing. Also with support from West Slope Senators Kerry Donovan and Don Coram, we secured broad bipartisan support in the Senate That bill passed in the Senate on a vote of 31-1, and the one opposition vote did admit afterwards that it was an accident. So I should say we are very lucky to have a group of talented West Slope legislators that work with us to protect West Slope water users. So now I want to dive into a couple of things that we're dealing with at the River District. Many of you may be aware that we've made some recommendations to our board, and they'll be making some decisions in July. But the district is facing some pretty significant fiscal challenges due to really what I call a trifecta of issues outside of our control. The first is the first that I'll mention is the Gallagher Amendment. The district and other similar local districts which are dependent upon property tax revenue have seen significant hits from the Gallagher Amendment. As is currently projected, we're going to see a potential 18% decrease in residential assessment rates, the statewide RAR, at the end of next year during the next assessment rate. That alone could impact the district to the tune of $400,000 out of our general fund. Because of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, that money would be lost essentially forever unless we were to go to the voters and ask for more. In 1937, I'll note, speaking of Tabor, the General Assembly gave the River District Board the authority to set its mill levy up to 2.5 mils. Today we sit at 1/4 of a single mill. That's largely because of Tabor. We've ratcheted it down to avoid refunds in decades past, but those decisions now are coming back to impact us significantly. And then lastly is the decline of tax revenue from the energy industry within our district. Over 90% of our revenue is derived from tax on real property, which includes the value of fossil fuel reserves and production, as well as the value of the related coal-fired power plants. Over the decades, this has meant that the district's assessed valuations, like many other public entities, has been subject to the same variation as the local real estate and energy sectors. Over the last 10 years, however, we have seen the contributions to the district's tax revenue from oil, gas, and coal production go from an all-time high of 24% in 2013 to an all-time low of 11% in 2018. So suffice it to say, we're facing a few pretty significant challenges, and under the leadership of Andy Mueller, our new general manager, we've gone through a pretty significant belt tightening exercise over the last few years. The district has been forced to reduce the number of full-time employees that we have by 4 total positions for a reduction of expenses of approximately $300,000. And while reduction of staff positions was necessary, this approach doesn't present a long-term remedy due to the fact that expenses will continue to increase at a greater rate than revenues, and due to the combined impact of Tabor and Gallagher. The district also, I think importantly, adopted a projected 2020 budget containing a 15% across the board reduction in expenses. So with that said, we have put a proposal in front of our board that would ask them to ask the voters for permission to increase our mill levy for up to 1/2 of a single mill from 1/4 of a single mill. For the average homeowner on the West Slope, that would mean about $6.34 per year in additional payments on your property taxes. It comes out to about $1.90 per $100,000 of home valuation. And then lastly, and I'll wrap it up, we've done our best to try and identify, if we were to increase our mill levy, what is it that we would do with those dollars to specifically benefit West Slope water users. and to continue fighting to keep water on the western slope. We've developed an implementation plan in which the district would allocate approximately $4.2 million annually, or approximately 87% of the amount raised, for partnerships with water users and communities within the district on projects that have been identified as priorities by local communities and basin roundtables. And I think any of you that are involved in the Basin Roundtable or have been involved in these management plan processes and you all know that list of projects is growing longer and longer all the time. We will, and we've committed to prioritize projects that are multi-purpose projects, which meet the needs of one or more of our following 5 categories. Those are productive agriculture, infrastructure, watershed health and water quality, conservation efficiency, and healthy rivers. And then the last point I'll make is that the district is committed to expending funds in an equitable manner, which over time disperses the benefits of this program geographically to all communities within the district's boundaries and between those identified categories. When I look at the way that the state's budget has been hit this last year, it's going to be important, I think, in order to choose our own destiny and keep moving forward on our own projects, to find opportunities to use those district dollars to drive the initiation and completion of projects, again, that are priorities for residents of the district, by serving as a catalyst for federal and state grants when they become available, as well as private foundation dollars. So with that, I thank you all for your time. I hope I didn't go too far over. Really appreciate your having me today.
All right. Well, thank you, Zane. I really appreciate that. That is helpful to know. And touching on what, Wendy mentioned earlier with identifying projects, is there any criteria that will be coming out of what the River District would put emphasis on?
That's
funding in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a lot will be determined by what the board decides in July. But those categories that we've proposed to the board, I think, fit quite nicely with the Basin Roundtable priorities, the Basin implementation plans, as well as some of the specific on-the-ground projects that Wendy and others are advancing. So we haven't put specific sideboards on or criteria, if you will, but really following the lead and finding an opportunity for the West Slope to fund some of those projects that have been identified by the roundtables within the Basin implementation plans and by our local communities. And importantly, all of that would be utilized to advance projects solely within the River District. That's the only sideboard that I know of at this point, is that it would be used only for projects in district.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Zane. I really appreciate that. And with no more questions, we're just going to move on to our next.
Sounds great. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Zane. So I apologize again. I've got a lot of sound in my background here. So our next speaker, Retta Bruegger, who works with as a regional specialist in range management for CSU Extension in Western Colorado. Well, just a second. Her specialties include rangeland monitoring and assessment, collaboration on rangelands management on public and private lands, and drought planning on rangelands. And she has an MS in range management from the University of Arizona and is originally from Western Colorado. All right, Retta, are you ready?
I am, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Ginny, for inviting me to speak today. I'm really impressed that many of you have stayed on this webinar. So I'm going to be switching gears now. It was a lot of fun to look at the water photos, but I'm going to be moving now to talk about rangelands, which are typically the sagebrush areas are pretty much the grazing lands that are on national forest or BLM and sometimes in private hands that are so much a part of ranching in Western Colorado. And specifically what Jenny asked me to speak about was monitoring. We have talked a lot about rangeland monitoring in Colorado and done some really great work on it. But what Jenny asked me to emphasize, and this was when we were thinking we'd be in the field, was to just demonstrate some really practical techniques in an effort to make it feasible and easy for you all if you're interested in actually doing this on lands you manage. But of course, since we can't be there because of the COVID situation, I'll just be talking about some pitfalls that I think often people encounter when they try to approach rangeland management, range monitoring. And then I will discuss a couple strategies for making it happen. So Erin, next slide. Thanks. All right, so before I dive in, I wanted to take a moment to just step back and ask the question, what is monitoring? I think it can mean a lot of different things in different sectors, but I think many of us do monitoring on a daily basis, whether or not we call it that or not. For example, have a picture of a calf in this slide, and I think producers often, of course, monitor their calves. They look at whatever body condition score, signs of health, signs of possible issues, and the reason we do that is so that we can detect a problem and respond appropriately. I think that's really similar to what we are trying to do in rangeland monitoring. We're trying to look at the landscape in a particular way that gives us a signal if there's a problem and we need to change course. Next slide. So talking to producers on the West Slope, a lot of people are really familiar with monitoring in my experience, and people generally, I think, would agree that monitoring or rangeland monitoring is important. There was a lot of great past work done with the Colorado Resource Monitoring Initiative that was a kind of a collaborative effort among different agencies as well as Colorado Cattlemen's. So monitoring is important, but in my experience, there's a lot less adoption of actual monitoring on rangelands by cattle producers. A couple years ago, we had a producer from Arizona up here. Her name is Wendy Krigler, and she gave a presentation on some of the monitoring work that she had done on her lands in Arizona. And one of the things she kind of reiterated again and again was that she encouraged people to know more about your land than anyone else, is one of her key phrases. And, why is that important? Well, I'm guessing many of you already know more about your land than many other people. If you've been managing for years, maybe decades, maybe generations. But the question is that knowledge documented in a way that's meaningful to maybe you and maybe agencies or the public if it's mixed management? And that's where rangeland monitoring comes in as something that's important. Wendy Krigler really demonstrated that monitoring had allowed her to tackle some issues and also maintain flexibility and access to public allotments in several different cases. And all of the monitoring that she did was a collaboration with the University of Arizona as well as with the public land management agency that she was operating on. So I think she made a strong case, but how do we make it happen here in Colorado? Next slide. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some common pitfalls that I see with monitoring. So there's 3 of them, and we'll start with the first. You can go to the next slide. I think this is the tendency to over-focus on the means and not the ends when it comes to monitoring. So if you've ever attended a rangeland monitoring workshop or I don't know, maybe read about it or whatever, maybe something like these pictures comes to mind for you as a visual of what it is, which is, what I call the transect thing. Like we go out into the field and we put a transect down and then we take some measurements, or maybe we look at grass. So I think in people's minds, based on my conversations, this is maybe what monitoring looks like. It looks like people being out in the field looking at the ground. Next slide. But in my opinion, I think this is only a small part of what monitoring is. I kind of have this graphic up here, and I made it up, but it kind of contrasting what we think monitoring looks like compared to what monitoring actually looks like. I think oftentimes monitoring, when people think of monitoring, they think the transect thing or going out to the field. That piece of monitoring is like maybe 80% of what you need to do in order to monitor, and all the rest is just kind of side things that don't take a lot of time. In reality, while going to the field does take a lot of time, I think it's closer to 30% of the total effort of what you need to do. Why is this important? Why do I consider this a pitfall? Well, I think a pitfall, it's a pitfall because when we think primarily about the transect thing, and then we don't see that information actually being used in a decision or impacting something that's important, it begins to feel really not important, and it helps us deprioritize monitoring itself because we're not seeing that information be used in a meaningful way. So I think when we're talking about monitoring, the ends are not the means. We need to scan out and really focus on what is it that we want to be able to show or understand from a monitoring effort. So then next slide. I think a potential solution to focusing on the ends and not the means is, of course, to begin with the end in mind. And I borrowed this phrase from Stephen Covey. But basically, monitoring needs to be able to influence the decision. And when we conceive of a monitoring project or the need for monitoring, we need to know what that decision is. So, for example, I have these two questions up on my slide that maybe someone might ask about a landscape or an allotment or some kind of land that's managed. You might ask, how much forage is out there compared to what you need? You also might ask, how is management influencing the long-term patterns in rangeland health on this landscape? You cannot monitor the same thing and answer both these questions. That's unfortunate perhaps, but I think it's true in terms of needing to understand what it is you want to learn and then prioritizing the method that you use based on that question, because not all rangeland monitoring methods answer all questions. So next slide. I wanted to share an example of, I think, just an excellent example of what I'm talking about here. So this comes from a rancher in southeastern Colorado. His name is Grady Grissom. And I think it was 2013, he published this article in the Rangelands Journal about his process of essentially using adaptive grazing management and his application of monitoring towards a decision and towards better management of his ranch. In this, he started out with a particular goal. So his goal was he wanted to increase the proportion of cool season grasses. Now, this goal does not make a lot of sense for the West Slope, so don't think too much about it. We primarily have cool season grasses. They're the bulk of our forage type, but where he's operating, there are both cool and warm season grasses, meaning that the grasses grow in response to different timing of precipitation. So don't focus on the cool season grass part, focus on that he had a specific thing he wanted to change about the ecosystem. He thought that having more of this particular functional type of grasses would give him more forage in the shoulder seasons. And so he set that as kind of, what he's working towards. And then it shaped what he was monitoring. So what he was looking at in the ecosystem. In his case, you can see the pictures in the lower right-hand corner from his article. He was just taking photos. These are repeat photographs that were published in the article from 1999 to 2008. And basically, he took it in the same place and he had changed his management, and he did see an increase in the particular species he was looking for that he was able to capture with his long-term photography. The thing I want to emphasize here, though, is photographs are a great method. They're easy to use. Most people have access to a camera, etc. But the real key here is he put a lot of thought into what he was taking a picture of and where he was taking that picture. So it wasn't just a picture of anything. It was a very deliberate, lots of thought put into it, and there was a deliberate outcome that he wanted to see from that particular monitoring effort. Next slide. So I think to wrap up pitfall number one, in order to get past the tendency, I think, to overfocus on the means and not the ends, I think it's important to begin with the end in mind, and that comes down to defining a question. So let's see, maybe that could be phrased as, I want to see XYZ change about the ecosystem, maybe less bare soil, fewer weeds, whatever it is. Therefore, you're going to observe, blank. This will depend on anyone's particular location and their preferences, their goals, all of that. But I think it is important that it's phrased or thought about in a way that leads you to look at something specific and then be able to channel whatever information you gather into a decision. So next slide. All right, I think the second pitfall in monitoring, rangeland monitoring, is that we get pretty bogged down in the methods, so the actual transect part, and perhaps lose focus on what the methods are going to tell you. So next slide, please. All right, I think here it's really important to focus on what gives you the most information for the least amount of time, and then refer to your goal. What gives you, what are you trying to achieve? Are you monitoring a public or private land? Those types of things. And then having a very good idea of where you're trying to go with this information. Those are important to consider. Let's say you've considered those. There are now quite a lot of apps available to monitor rangelands. Now, if you have a flip phone, these apps are not necessarily available to you, but maybe you know someone who has a smartphone. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some apps that are available that can be used on smartphones. Next slide, please. All of these apps that I'm actually most of these methods that I'm talking about that are on apps are also part of the Colorado Resource Monitoring Initiative, so they would fall under that agreement. They're just in app form. So the first one is Pasture Map. Maybe some of you are already using this. This comes from private industry, and I believe there's a free version and then you have to pay some amount of money for different features. But this app does provide a lot of functionality. You can see here on the screenshot, but basically what it allows you to do is in your phone, go to a specific area or pasture, outline that pasture, and then keep track of things like when you went in, when you left, how many days you were in there, dry matter, utilization rates, those types of things. So that might be a good option for folks if that's what you're interested in tracking. Next slide. There's also some photo taking apps that are available, and I've used GrassSnap, this one in particular, and Avenza Maps. GrassSnap is free. It's from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Basically what it is, it's just a photo that you take on your smartphone in the app, and then it photo stamps the photo with the name of the plot, the location with the GPS coordinates if you're in cell phone signal, the date you took it, the time, and the direction that you're facing. So I think this has been pretty useful for me because it is hard to keep track of, why you're taking photos of different landscapes. So it just puts it right on the photo, so there's no ambiguity of what the heck that photo is of. Avenza Maps is another one, and I know that several folks at the BLM as well as the Forest Service are using Avenza Maps, but it is a software, a map inside your smartphone. You download the map through the app, and then you can scroll to where you are on the map. It has that little blue dot like Google Maps, and then drop a pin and then get a picture that's correlated with that location. So it can also be kind of a nice tool. Next slide. If you do want to go towards more quantitative measurements, there's an app that's called Land PKS. It's developed by the Jornada Experimental Range in New Mexico. And this one I think actually is pretty cool. I've used it quite a bit. It's an app that asks you don't have to do it, but you can take pictures, you can collect a GPS location from within your phone, you can dig a soil pit, and it guides you through that process, and then you collect data using a meter stick. So if anyone's done the transect thing in the past, this doesn't use a transect, it just is a meter stick or a yardstick that you put down, I think it's 25 times, and then record the vegetation at increments along that yardstick. These are screenshots of the app in the bottom right-hand corner. So it's primarily picture-based, and so you're just selecting based on the photo. But the nice thing about it is that it's automatically integrated, and so you get immediate output in terms of your bare ground, foliar cover, rock, fragment, weedy species, all of that. So it takes out that step of kind of doing something with the data after you've collected it. This app used to be public only, which I think discouraged a lot of people from using it, but now they have a private setting where your data can be private to you if you use the app. So next slide. So going back to this example from Grady Grissom and the Rancho Largo Cattle Company, in terms of the method that he chose, you know, as I mentioned, his goal was to increase the proportion of this specific grass species. And therefore, in order to do that, you know, he tailored what he was observing to observing the proportion of that grass species using a photo. So that was his monitoring method. But again, he knew why he was taking the photo, and he came back to that same place every year to take that photo. So next slide. All right, so we're moving on to the final pitfall, which is, I think, not doing anything with the data that you do collect. This is actually very common even among agencies and sometimes scientists. And historically, we haven't had necessarily the staff or the software capabilities to actually use our data well. I think that is changing now, and I think it's something that's extremely important to think about. So next slide. As I said in the beginning, we're not monitoring because we enjoy counting grass, right? We are hypothetically monitoring because we want to be able to inform a decision. So if you don't do anything with the data, you know, let's say you've planned well, you've collected it, if you don't actually revisit that, then you've kind of failed to do anything meaningful with that data. So I think that when thinking about monitoring, it's important to think through, you know, how are you going to actually, you know, keep track of it, maybe keep records, and then how are you going to apply it to a decision? Now, this is a lot easier, I think, if you have gone through that stage I recommended of really thinking about what it is you want to accomplish with the monitoring. And in the Grissom example, you know, he thought through and he said, I'd like to see cool season abundance increase. And so if I do, then I can say that management is accomplishing the goals. So he had a really specific application to how he was going to use that data. Next slide. All right, so the three pitfalls and potential ways to get past them: over focus on the means and not the ends. And I think by putting a lot more time into thinking about why you're monitoring and what can help overcome that, and it can also help monitoring feel less pointless. Number two, it's really easy to get bogged down in the methods, and also scientists do this too. I think historically, you know, when I started, we would just spend so much time at each plot, and it prevented us in some cases from getting enough plots to actually say something meaningful. So everyone does it, but we do have technologies now and help in order to really focus on what's important and streamline that data collection method. And finally, we don't do anything with the data. So I think the way to get past that is, again, is to really think through in the beginning about what you're trying to accomplish, and then actually you will have a pathway to apply that data. I see a question in the chat, which is, what are your thoughts on AIM monitoring versus rangeland production data and adjusting livestock operations based on the data? Yeah, so great question. The AIM monitoring protocol, which is the assessment, inventory, and monitoring protocol that the BLM has adopted, I forget when, but maybe about 8 years ago, maybe 6. I think that's a really excellent protocol. Actually, I know there's lots of complaining about it, but I think they have done a great job about thinking through how to collect data, what to collect, and then how to use it. So they've done an excellent job in that realm. It's definitely challenging. So my thoughts, those are my thoughts on it. In terms of versus rangeland production data, so the AIM monitoring data is generally trend monitoring data. So they're looking at long-term trends that happen over many years. Generally, although production can also indicate a trend. So when we say production, we're talking about like above ground growth of grass species, forage species. Production data is very closely tied to rainfall. So I've heard some folks refer to it as a very expensive way to measure that it rained. That's not to say it's pointless, because we need to know how much forage is out there in order to know how long cows can be out there, right? But it's not going to tell you necessarily about the long-term trajectory of the ecosystem. In order to understand more about the long-term trajectory of the ecosystem, I think things like looking at bare soil or cover is a more important way to do that. And AIM has much more of that bare soil type of measurements, cover measurements. So, but yes, but I think the second part of the question is adjusting livestock operations based on the data. I think that's critical. So I think the way I would see that is you would adjust livestock operations within the year on production data, but the AIM or trend data tells you long-term about adjustments that you might need to make. So hopefully I answered that question, but we can talk after if I did not. All right, next slide. All right, so how do we avoid the pitfalls, right, with range monitoring? There's a couple of different ways. Next slide. One thing that I've been doing here in the western slope of Colorado, and specifically with some producers in Mesa and Delta County, is that I've offered that I will assist people individually with a monitoring program. So in all cases, what that has looked like is sitting down with the interested person, and in some cases the land management agency, so that'd be BLM or Forest Service, and talking collaboratively about what it is important to monitor, where are the concerns on the allotment, and then going together into the field to actually monitor. And in many cases, I think people just maybe wanted me there for one day, but then they're going to do it on their own in the future. I've also asked people to, revisit the data that we collect kind of on a yearly basis, so that we are building in that opportunity to look at the data we collect and not just going out to the field and then forgetting about it. So that's one option. I encourage you, if you are interested and you're on the western slope of Colorado, I encourage you to reach out. There's also other organizations that have a lot of technical expertise in this area. So NRCS is one. The BLM, as someone mentioned, they are starting a pilot program called the Outcome-Based Grazing Program, which I think is pretty cool. It has some cool potential. And that is essentially an adaptive grazing grazing management program. So I think there's just a few pilot ranches now, but they are looking to amp that up a bit. So that might be one option. But again, if you are interested in working one-on-one, I'd be happy to talk with you about what that looks like. So next slide. All right. I did want to share just one last example. In southwestern Colorado, where I've worked for a couple of years, when I first started my job, a group of producers in that area were kind of in a disagreement with the Forest Service about the trajectory of the land on allotments that they managed. And so that's why they reached out to me as somebody who didn't necessarily have skin in the game, and me as a representative of CSU Extension. And so out of that, what we ultimately did is meaning this group of ranchers, the Forest Service, and myself all applied for funding to be able to do cooperative monitoring in response to the disagreement about the trajectories on the allotment. So we met several times, we came up with a question and a monitoring protocol, and then we were actually able to hire a range technician last summer who monitored 32 plots, and then I analyzed it, and we followed that up with some interpretation sessions. So this was one way of being able to get a lot of monitoring done that probably exceeded the capacity of myself as well as the ranchers involved. But ranchers were still involved in some meaningful ways. So they went to the field with the person, they helped design the protocol, and they also designed the question in terms of what we were looking at. And they helped interpret the data. So ranchers were involved in a lot of profound ways, but the monitoring itself wasn't resting 100% on their shoulders. So I think this was a positive experience overall. One potential downside was that it doesn't provide long-term funding, but it did give us a really good start, and we did get some at least short-term answers to our questions. So last slide, or next slide. All right, so if you are not monitoring now, you are probably average. No offense to anyone, average is good. But I do think monitoring has benefits, especially as we are set for some really big changes in the next 20 to 50 years, as some of the previous speakers have talked about, both in terms of population and in terms of ecological trends. So I think monitoring might be a good option if you are especially managing on public lands. If you are interested and think it would be good for you, I think really think about why you want to do it and where. And I encourage you also to not go at it alone, to talk to someone and really bounce ideas back and forth so that you do allocate time towards the most important thing. And sometimes understanding what that is not something that comes easily or right away. So finally, I wanted to end on this picture of a twig. This is actually a tree. A friend gave me this, and it's a hawthorn tree, which is kind of hilarious because it looks like a stick, but I planted it nonetheless, and I was preparing for this presentation, so kind of seemed like, things melded together in my head. And there's this saying of when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago, when's the second best time to plant a tree now. So maybe that's like this tree, of course I would have loved to have planted it 20 years ago and have some shade now, but that's not true. And similar with a monitoring program, it would be great to have started 20 years ago. But if that's not true for you, I think today is a really good second option. So I encourage you to think through it and let me know if I can help and work through a monitoring protocol with you if that's appropriate. So thanks for listening, and I believe that's all my slides.
Well, thank you, Retta. And I have one question. So if I want to do monitoring and I have a specific question or problem I want to ask, what's my next step? Who do I talk to? I mean, I can talk to my neighbors, but what else after that?
Yeah, well, I am happy to talk to anyone about that. So you're welcome to contact me. I can put my contact information into the chat. If you are, let's say, working on an NRCS contract, then and that requires monitoring, I assume they've already contacted you about that and you're working with them on that. But I think if it's something that you're interested in, you're welcome to contact me. You could also contact your Forest Service or BLM range conservationist or allotment manager to see if there's any opportunities there or if they have any thoughts. But yeah, I'd be happy to work with someone on thinking through those questions and the methods.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Retta. I really appreciate it. And if we have no more questions, we'll go with the last presentation. I think, Aaron, if you can give me the ability to screen share, I will get started, and we'll be talking just about funding. All right. Okay, I think this is working now. Okay. All right. Great. So I'm with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, and I don't want to take up too much of your time here. I just wanted to wrap up with talking about funding, and we're an association of 17 different organizations, so I try to work with every one of these groups here in trying to support and preserve irrigated agriculture. So we've talked about projects, we've talked about funding. I mean, and there's a lot of typical projects out there that I Wendy Ryan mentioned earlier in terms of diversion structures, head gates, lining, rehabilitating canals, even starting to see more of like dredging reservoirs or sediment programs to make sure that we can keep those in shape, or addressing problems with like a spillway structure, because there are quite a few storage structures throughout the state that do have restrictions placed on them because they do need some repair. And so there are a lot of different projects that are out there. And also you're going to hear this get thrown around a lot, efficiency projects. And I mean, efficiency, it's a 4-letter word in a lot of places. And while it really, and I can't say this enough, that it depends so much on your circumstances. And I think a lot of people in the ag community understand that, well, in certain situations, it doesn't make sense to line an entire ditch. It might make a lot of sense if you have one area where there's a slough and it breaks down every year and you have to rent a backhoe and to line 500 feet, a quarter mile. That makes a lot of sense. And that's a conversation that we're always having to have with other water stakeholders about when is it appropriate and when does it make the most sense. And also, and I'm starting to think more, not just efficiency of water, but efficiency of work. And when it comes to having maybe an automated head gate, I mean, how does that make your ranch a better run operation? Does having trash guards on your diversion structure, or maybe a more improved diversion structure where, I mean, maybe you're pushing up a rock dam with blue tarps over it, and sure enough, I mean, you're going to be diverting water, but you're going to be diverting every piece of sediment you can. And is something going to make your work more efficient? And that's something that I try to think a lot about, and think in more of those terms. And then we also heard this term quite a bit, multi-beneficial projects. And I want to address that there's a lot of emphasis on this, and I'm not with the state demographer's office. I don't know how many new people are coming to Colorado are from the ag community and farmers and ranchers, but I'm pretty sure there's not many. And most of these people coming to our state are unfamiliar with agriculture, and they have a lot of priorities in their life. And these projects provide an opportunity for us to work with these other groups and show the benefits that ag has for the rest of the state. And I'm more than aware that in that world of environmental conservation organizations, there's some people that make me want to tear my hair out. I agree with you. You buy me a drink, I might tell you a few names. But there are more and more people in that community who get it. They get that working lands and irrigated agriculture and healthy ag meets some of their goals. And it's trying to find the advocates in that community and trying to meet their needs while also meeting ours, not to the detriment of your farm or ranch operation, but so it provides a benefit to you. I mean, absolutely. So where do we find matching funds? That's one that is always pretty difficult. I mean, you can go through EQIP, but there's still that match. And then often, I mean, private funds, local districts and organizations, you can match federal and state funds. This is something we see pretty often with using Colorado Water Conservation Board money and EQIP money. Private foundations and organizations, whether it's anywhere from those that are more in the environmental world, like the Nature Conservancy, to the Gates Family Foundation. I mean, those are groups that are actively involved. And there's going to be a big caveat of, well, for the next year, money's going to be pretty slim everywhere. But after that, and in normal times, I'm often surprised how much money is out there. It's just really trying to connect the dots to make that work. I mean, and we see a lot of these projects of stream bank stabilization. This is some that have been going down on in the Rio Grande and really helping a lot with their sediment. Just downstream of this, or just north of Alamosa is the Centennial Ditch, and they were having to dredge through their ditch pretty often through the summer just to pull out the sediment, they've got a real new structure. This is their old structure, or this is the prairie ditch structure. It's a bunch of riprap. They actually even had a few pieces of old military equipment that were left around that they'd throw in the river. And this is the newer structure. And the amount of time that they spend adjusting their head gate, dealing with trash and sediment has dropped significantly. And yeah, at times, are they maybe diverting less water? Yes, no, this year they're still trying to, this has been their second year with their new diversion structures in some of those ditches, and they're trying to figure out in a dry year and a wet year, it can be really different. But in terms of the efficiency of work, there's been some huge improvements for them. Same, you've got some of the, like here's one of those other push-up dams on the left in the Upper Gunnison. We're also seeing some other projects here on the right. This is over Bill Trampy's ranch. He's on Ohio Creek, and putting in a lot of these locks through these laterals that irrigate his fields that, like that, they're on a battery, and every 24 hours they open up. You have to go out there and push it down yourself, but it does half the work for you. And trying to identify more kind of projects. This is also out in the Gunnison, another project that this was the Teach Out Fairchild ditch. And I mean, you got that rock riprap dam. And if you love taking a backhoe into the river and pushing that dam up and covering it with a blue tarp, and if the river commissioner comes out and says, well, it's leaking here, go back out and fix it. If you love doing that, go ahead, fine. But I'm sure there's quite a few producers who they would love something that is more efficient and a better use of their time. Here's a Google map view of that diversion structure, and you can see, let's see, I think I even have a pointer on here. Yeah, you can even see that here they have that, and they're just diverting the entire river down their ditch. And this is the new structure. And you can see it right there. And they're not having to go out there and pretty much dig up the river. So we're trying to really focus on some of these projects that provide a benefit to that ag operation. But when you also start identifying these other benefits that for other water users, that's where you not only find funding, but you can also find support with people writing grants. I mean, there's a lot of help in that, whether it's better managing your ditch with a different kind of head gate for larger ditches, whether having locks in those ditch systems, whether there's a slough in a ditch, that can be a big improvement. And when you can demonstrate and a lot of these kinds of projects, these aren't new types of projects, but a lot of them, they do have an environmental or a recreational benefit. And if you can highlight that, and you can really bring some of those people to the table and more resources. So this is up on our website, coagwater.org, and we've put together with the Ditch and Reservoir Company Alliance, DARCA, a funding guide of just who all is handing out money out there in the state of Colorado, whether it's private foundations, state, regional, certain districts, or federal, and how does that work? And I just wanted to say is I will help you apply and secure grants. I'm working on one right now with a reservoir up in Jackson County. They need to do a storage survey of the reservoir. And it's not just me that can do this. There's actually quite a few people in the ag community, and I'll touch on that, who we can help with this. In my experience, the past couple years I've been involved with this, is that when money's being dished out, and when there is money, unlike what we're going to have in the immediate future, often there's the ag community, compared to the others, there's less of them at the table showing up, and it's understandable. I mean, I don't know many farms or ranches that employs a grant writer, and the timing is difficult. I mean, they're some of the busiest people I know. But there's a lot of money being left out there. And at times there's even funding for projects that aren't really ag related that get ag funding, and it makes me raise some eyebrows. But there's a lot of potential projects out there that are missing that ag component, and so there's a lot of us who are willing to help get you there. And so there's the basin roundtables each have their own funding, the WSRF grant, and this can help with all sorts of different issues, whether it's just technical assistance, studies, and then actual on-the-ground projects. The different basin roundtables, they meet about every month or every other month. Usually at the very least, you need a 25% financial match for these applications. And then that's passed on to the board for approval. There's also a water plan grant. And these can be related to storage, dredging, multi-beneficial projects, technical assistance, infrastructure rehab. And in total, CWCB funds can cover up to 75% of these projects. So, and that deadline is August 1st and February 1st. So twice a year for that program. But as you know, I mean, there's a huge hole in the budget. And it's looking at like those, from what I've been understand, those basins and their money, they might not get a single disbursement for 2021. And what they have available in 2020 is going to be going pretty quickly. So there's a good chance that it won't even be for 2022 that some of those have fund, that those state pools are filled up again. I mean, there's a lot of talk about infrastructure bill early next year at the federal level. And so there's more options, but really having that even now, when on the immediate future, the outlook for funding it's grim, it's not great. Getting that project lined up and that application written, and we just set it on a shelf and having that ready for when it gets better, I mean, that's a huge step. And these basin roundtables are starting to look for projects. And you better believe that other communities in the water world, I mean, they're getting their lists ready too. And that's something where the ag community definitely needs to be at the table. And so if there's a project that, I mean, you might not even, you're wondering if it even merits being a project, or if you just have an idea, it's worth talking about. And so one other person, he's participating today, Paul Kmeyer, he's with the Colorado Department of Ag. Here's his contact information. So his job is helping ditches, producers, and secure funding and grants for projects, especially at the federal level. And he focuses a lot if you are in the salinity area, but his work also takes him beyond that for the entire Colorado River Basin. So Paul is a great guy. I mean, he's got an operation up on Surface Creek, so he gets it. And I mean, I'm willing to help. I know Phil Brink, who was on earlier today, Phil, I'm going to throw him under the bus too. And I think he did offer, I mean, we're willing to really help with producers that are interested in being involved in these projects. And we're not the only ones. I'm often surprised how many good resources are out there. I know that the project that Wendy Ryan spoke about earlier with the ditch inventory, some of those ditches that did that inventory of their diversion structure have actually spiraled off and now done an entire irrigation inventory. One of those was the Grand River ditch. And I know, I think Linda Hansen, and Linda, she's one of the units. She's got a cow-calf operation off of that ditch. And I was talking with her how she was literally using Google Maps to mark the irrigated acreage and parcels for that ditch system. And then with the help of a former NRCS member, they were able to go through and secure, I think they got that, I think recently, over $100,000 for some work on their ditch, which is pretty impressive. And so there is a lot of help out there. And I just wanted to reiterate that. And here's my contact information if you're interested. And like I said, it's going to get slim pickings the next year and a half for funding, but especially if we can highlight the multi-benefits of some of these projects. And that doesn't mean it has to be a wild, crazy project. I mean, replacing a diversion structure can have benefits to other users. And it can definitely have possibly can have a really good benefit to your own operation. There's a possibility we can definitely bring other stakeholders involved in that and other resources. So that is, I think that's all I'm going to be doing today. So I think we had one question. Okay. I know Retta, she just included her information in the chat there if you wanted to talk with her. Thank you again, everybody. If you have any other questions, just feel free to email me or any of the other panelists. I want to thank our panelists again for being involved and making this work for us. So I appreciate that. Wendy, Phil, Zane, and Retta, and Ginny and Aaron, thank you for putting this all together.
Thank you, Greg and Jenny. It was a pleasure.
Yep, thank you. Greg, I have a question for you if no one else is asking.
Oh, yeah.
So are there any tools available for, I mean, this would be complicated, so I expect no, but just curious, you know, some of the changes that Zane brought up about increased temperature and lower supply and maybe increased drought conditions moving into the future, are there any tools available to kind of triage what types of projects would help folks out the most with changing conditions or anything like that?
I probably would not be the best person to answer that question. I guess it depends on what are you focusing on.
Mm-hmm.
On a single ag operation? I mean, you've got some really good data with like the co-ag-met stations. And those, I mean, and so you do have the co-ag-met stations, and I think most people who are using the data from that really use it for irrigation scheduling. But they do keep really good data on ET, and I mean, you can see that going up in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
And so CSU, they also have that WISE irrigation scheduler that they
Mm-hmm.
use, and I found it a bit clunky to use.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Excel, but those are the ones that I'm most familiar with on a farm operation. But in terms of overall, I mean, that's a really good question of what tools we have out there. I'm not familiar with any tools that could really address that. I think at least for me, there's like shooting from the hip and just trying to figure out, well, I mean, it's obviously going to mean in some places definitely more storage or better options for irrigation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. Well, thanks.
Well, if that is it, thank you again for everybody participating. And enjoy the rest of your week. That's another question. Okay. Well, we've got, and we do have this whole thing is being recorded, and we will send that out to everybody later hopefully either later today or later this week. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.